The crisp mountain air promised serenity, a new beginning, but what we found buried in the dust of our attic shattered that illusion, revealing a shadow that stretched not just across the forest, but across the very fabric of existence. I'm Elias Vance, and this is how it began, deep in the shadow of the Blackwood Peaks. Our old life, a suffocating city existence of ceaseless noise and relentless demands, had finally pushed us to the edge. My wife, Clara, had been looking drawn, the sparkle in her eyes dimmed by the concrete jungle. My son, Leo, a teenager perpetually tethered to his phone, barely looked up from screens. And Hannah, our youngest, seemed to wilt more with each passing day, yearning for open spaces. The log cabin, a sprawling, rustic structure nestled deep within acres of untouched wilderness, felt like an answer to a prayer. We arrived as the sun dipped, painting the vast canopy of ancient pines in hues of fire and deep violet. The air was cool, clean, and carried the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. As we finally emptied the last box from the rented truck, a collective sigh escaped us, a mix of exhaustion and profound relief. Clara squeezed my hand, her eyes, finally, alight with a quiet joy I hadn't seen in years. "It truly is," she murmured, her voice filled with wonder. "I have a good feeling about this place." I turned to Leo and Hannah, gesturing at the towering sentinels of the forest surrounding us. "So what do you two think?" Leo, of course, was still wrestling with his phone, holding it aloft in a futile quest for a signal. "How close are our neighbors?" he grumbled, not bothering to meet my gaze. "Far enough to give us some peace and quiet," I replied, trying to inject some enthusiasm into his usual teenage apathy, "but not so far that we can't get to civilization if we need anything." Hannah stood beside him, arms crossed, taking in the vastness with a cautious gaze. I knew deep down that this quiet life, so different from the city's relentless hum, would eventually win them over, and for the first few weeks it truly was everything we'd hoped for. A peaceful retreat. The constant drone of city life was replaced by the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. We settled into a rhythm, adjusting to the slower pace, the absence of sirens, the quietude that at first felt almost deafening. One evening the air was crisp, hinting at the approaching chill of autumn. We were all gathered in the living room, a fire crackling merrily in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn log walls. Leo and Hannah, surprisingly engaged, were watching some old family movie on the small television we'd managed to connect to a satellite dish. Clara was curled up beside me on the sofa, her head resting on my shoulder, the faint scent of her shampoo a comforting presence. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt such profound contentment. The only sounds were the soft pop and hiss of the burning logs, the cheerful, if slightly cheesy, soundtrack of the movie, and the gentle patter of a light rain beginning to fall outside. The mingled aroma of freshly made popcorn and the earthy scent of pine and wood smoke permeated everything, creating an idyllic tableau of family warmth. It was a perfect evening, one that solidified our conviction that leaving the city was the best decision we had ever made. Then it began, a long, drawn-out, mournful sound, unlike anything I had ever heard, echoed across the landscape. It wasn't just a howl, it was a guttural cry that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us, seeping into the thick log walls of our home. It was ancient, primal, and deeply unsettling. Our movie night came to an immediate, jarring halt. The movie's cheerful laughter abruptly died, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The howl continued, shifting, morphing from a deep, resonant growl that vibrated in my chest to a shrill, ear-piercing wail that raised goosebumps along my arms. It reverberated through the dense forest, bouncing off the massive trunks of the ancient pines and oaks that surrounded our cabin, permeating every fiber of our being. Leo, his hand frozen midair, a handful of popcorn forgotten, his brow furrowed in confusion and alarm. Hannah's eyes, wide and fixed on the window, seemed to try and pierce the inky blackness beyond, to somehow will the unseen horror into view. Clara's head lifted from my shoulder, and I felt her fingers tighten around my forearm, her grip surprisingly strong. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, pulling her closer. "I don't know," I managed, though the word felt inadequate, hollow. I tried to reassure us both, to rationalize it. "A wolf," I murmured, but even as the word left my lips, I knew it wasn't true. I'd spent enough time in the wilderness to know the sound of a wolf. This was something else entirely. Something wrong. When the awful sound finally faded, leaving only a lingering tremor in the air, we sat in stunned silence. The movie continued to play, its bright colors and artificial laughter now jarringly out of place, a stark contrast to the quiet dread that had settled over us. We were a tableau of a family without a care, yet our minds were miles away, replaying that horrifying cry. Clara was the first to move, slowly releasing my arm as she stood and walked to the window, peering out into the shadowy woods. "No lights," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "I don't see anything." Leo set the few remaining pieces of popcorn back into the bowl, glancing first at me, then at the window. "Dad, do you think we should?" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. I stood, feeling the tension in my muscles, the involuntary jolt of fear that had shot through me. I tried to force a casual tone, though my voice still felt a bit rough. "Relax," I said, attempting a reassuring smile. It was just a howl, plenty of wildlife in the forest. Hannah, however, was not convinced. She pulled her legs up onto the sofa, wrapping her arms around her knees, her eyes still darting uneasily towards the window. "It didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard," she said, her voice small. "We'll see if it even happens again," I said, trying to regain some semblance of control, to push the unsettling incident from our minds. "For now, let's just get back to the movie." But we didn't really get back to it. The movie played on, its dialogue and music filling the room, but none of us were truly listening. Our thoughts remained fixed on that unholy cry, on the stark reminder of the unknown wilderness that lurked just beyond our cozy walls. The rest of the night was spent in an uncomfortable silence, each of us lost in our own unsettling thoughts. Even as we retired to our rooms, I was sure we all still heard the echoes of that howl in our minds. 2 nights later, it happened again. We were gathered around the dining table, the hearty scent of Clara's beef stew filling the air, a fresh-baked loaf of bread steaming in the center. I was trying to keep things light, telling Leo and Hannah a ridiculous story from my office days in the city, trying to coax out a smile. I saw the faint curve of Hannah's lips, Leo's almost imperceptible grin, and Clara's approving nod from across the table, grateful for my efforts. And then it came. That now familiar, chilling scream abruptly cut through our conversation. This time it was louder, more frenetic, a terrifying blend of shrieking wails and lower, guttural growls. It echoed through the trees, over the distant river, finding its way into the very core of our home, of our dinner, of our minds. I heard the clang of silverware dropping to plates as everyone froze, holding their breath. It went on, long and drawn out, a prolonged assault on our senses. Clara was the first to speak, after a long moment, just as the howl finally faded into the oppressive quiet. "That's not a wolf," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on mine across the table. I shook my head slowly, meeting her eyes. "No," I said, "not a wolf." We held each other's gaze for a long moment, a silent communication passing between us. The kids were just staring at us, their faces drawn, eyes wide with dawning comprehension. None of us had wanted to admit it, but with a second night of hearing it, we couldn't rationalize it away as a mere animal cry. As it faded again into the darkened trees, the silence that followed was less reassuring, and far more menacing 2 days after that second night of howling. Clara suggested a family walk in the woods. "We need to shake off this cabin fever," she said, though I could see the underlying unease in her eyes. We left shortly after breakfast, the sun dappling through the canopy, a cool breeze rustling the leaves. I kept finding my eyes darting around the underbrush, my mind repeatedly flashing back to those horrible cries from the nights before. But I forced myself to relax, to put on a brave face. I didn't want to frighten the kids any more than they already were. I kept up a cheerful commentary, pointing out various trees and plants, identifying harmless animal tracks left by common woodland critters. Then Leo called out to us. "Mom, Dad, come look at this." His voice was tight, strained with fear. My heart stopped. We pushed through a thicket of ferns and saw them, 3 massive slashes, incised deeply into the bark of a thick pine. The rugged outer layer was shredded, exposing the lighter wood beneath. They were far too high off the ground, easily 8 feet up, and too large, too vicious, to have come from any animal I knew that inhabited these forests. Hannah swallowed hard, her voice a shaky stammer. Those are huge." She reached out, her fingers trembling, touching the jagged edge of one of the claw marks. Her face grew pale. Clara stepped closer, examining the marks, shaking her head. "Too big, even for a bear." I nodded, trying desperately to conjure another explanation, and failing. We continued our walk in silence, the peaceful morning now tainted. We found more and more of them as we went, our anxiety mounting with every new set we discovered. By the time we returned home, the cloudless, sunny morning had been overshadowed by a pervasive unease. The peaceful forests surrounding our new home now seemed to harbor some unknown menace, their presence inexplicably revealed in the vicious gouges marring the innocent trees. Our idyllic retreat from the chaos of civilized life now felt less like a dream fulfilled, and more like a foolish venture into a danger we couldn't yet understand, one that left only its mournful cries and menacing signatures in its wake. We stood before the cheerful log facade of our home, the very symbol of our new tranquil life, and felt only apprehension rather than comfort, its warmth replaced with an ominous silence. That evening found the four of us crowded together on the couch in the living room, eyes unfocused on the television where a familiar rerun of some old sitcom played. Clara was knitting something, her hands working on autopilot, but every few moments the needles would still, and her eyes would unconsciously drift to the windows lining the walls. Leo and Hannah half-heartedly shared a bowl of popcorn, similarly distracted. Hannah suddenly went rigid beside me, and I felt her grip on my arm tighten as she used her other hand to point towards the window. "Dad, look," she breathed, her voice barely more than a whisper. I followed her gaze, and my heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to burst from my chest. In the muted moonlight just beyond the glass, I could make out the hulking shape of some massive creature. It stood motionless in the shadows, its frame larger than any animal I was familiar with. And then I saw them, the fiery glow of its eyes, burning inexplicably in the darkness, and somehow, through the window, they seemed to bore directly into our very being. Leo inhaled a quick breath beside his mother, dropping his forgotten popcorn to the floor with a soft thud. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Don't antagonize it," Clara said quietly, never taking her eyes off the thing. It just stood there, eyes glowing in the moonlight, staring at the house, at us. It slowly lifted its head and let out a mournful howl, and we all blanched at the terrifyingly familiar sound. "I can't believe it," Hannah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's real. It's actually real." With that, the thing retreated into the tree line, its colossal form lost to the shadows, as the only thing left visible was the dim yellow glow of its eyes. A moment later, those two pinpricks of light winked out, and we were left only with the haunting memory of its cry. The morning after our terrifying sighting, we began the process of unpacking and organizing the attic space. Clara had suggested it as a way to distract ourselves from the profound unease that had settled over us. "Come on," I said, trying to sound bright, leading the family up the narrow staircase that led to the attic. It was a fairly large space, covered in a thick layer of dust, filled with various pieces of antique furniture, stacks of forgotten boxes, and piles of moldering books. The four of us divided the labor, Clara and I moving some of the larger, heavier items, while Leo and Hannah were tasked with digging through boxes of smaller things. After about an hour, Leo called over to us from where he was crouched near one of the dim corners of the attic. We looked over and saw him holding an old, leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age and exposure. "Hey, listen to this," he said, his voice tinged with an unusual excitement. "This notebook belonged to a guy named Jeremiah. I think it's a diary." He flipped it open and began scanning the handwritten notes. May 12th, 1987. "Arrived at the log house today. Nice little place, secluded and private, right in the middle of the forest, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Spent my first night here, and it was very peaceful. Only heard some crickets and I think an owl, but there was some strange howling I heard a little later in the night, probably some animal." Leo paused, glancing at us. "Okay, so far, pretty much our experience." He continued. "Saw some sort of scratch on one of the trees near the porch today. It was pretty high up on the trunk and looked fairly fresh. Heard that same howl again tonight, a bit closer this time. There's something about it that just seems wrong. Like some sort of primal evil. I can't explain it, but it just makes me feel anxious and on edge. I wish I could identify what animal it is." Leo turned a few pages. June 3rd, 1987. "I hear the howling almost every night now. I'm starting to see more of those scratches on the trees, and they don't look like anything I've ever seen before. They almost seem intelligent somehow. I can't shake the feeling of dread I get when I hear those howls. It just stays with me, a cold knot in my gut. I'm certain I saw some sort of shadowy shape moving around the edge of the property a couple of times. I can't make out any details other than eyes reflecting the moonlight. Those eyes, they follow you." He cleared his throat, the light in the attic dimming a bit as a cloud passed over the sun. June 15th, 1987. I've taken to studying the beast's movements over the past few nights. It seems to follow a consistent hunting ground, circling the cabin at a distance of 50 yards or so. Its howls are unlike any animal I've ever encountered. There's something almost sinister about it, and the sheer size. I've caught glimpses of its shape in the moonlight, and it's massive, far too large for any wolf I've ever seen. Tonight I used a different tactic, using not only powerful lights, but also fireworks to create explosive flashes and deafening chaos. I thought I'd succeeded in driving it away. It withdrew and I thought it fled back into the woods, but it returned later with a furious howl that shook me to my core, a sound of absolute, unbridled rage. Leo's voice grew quieter, a tremor in it now. June 25th, 1987. I'm scared, but I can't let that paralyze me. I'm going out again tonight. I need to find where this thing lives, where it hides. I've acquired a firearm, though I don't know if it would even be able to harm the thing. Didn't find it. I knew it was there, though. I could smell it, hear its low growl, and feel its hateful eyes upon me from the darkness just beyond the reach of my lamp. The howling was different tonight, almost gleeful. I feel like it was taunting me, mocking me. I don't know what else to do. I'm running out of ideas. His hand holding the diary was shaking now. July 2nd, 1987. I don't think I can beat this thing. I've gone over everything I've written again and again, but I can't figure out a way to get rid of this monstrous thing. Even now, I feel like I'm being watched, hunted. I'm so afraid. I think I'm starting to lose my mind. This house that I thought was such a great refuge now feels like a prison, and the isolation is more than I can bear. I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave and try to make it somewhere away from here. But I'm going to leave this diary here so that anyone who comes here after me will know what happened, know what's happening. God help you. When Leo finished reading, none of us said anything for a long while, each of us lost in our own thoughts about Jeremiah's plight. Hannah finally spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. He just left, she asked. He just gave up, Leo shrugged, looking pale. He was alone. I mean, you can't really fault him for it, Mom. Clara sat up a little straighter on the dusty floor. He was brave enough to try to face it alone, though. There must be something we can take from his lessons. I nodded, my mind already racing, a strange mixture of fear and determination bubbling within me. Exactly. Jeremiah was just one man, and we're a family. And we have the advantage of knowing what he's already tried. The next morning, Clara and I sat at the kitchen table, Jeremiah's journal laid open between us. The yellowed pages seemed to hum with the weight of its grim history. We discussed our options, what we were going to do. I took Clara's hand in mine, squeezing it gently. We're in this together, I said, looking into her tired but resolute eyes. And we'll get through it together. Our immediate priority was security. In the meantime, I want every light in this house on at night, and I don't want any doors or windows left unlocked for any reason. We focused on Jeremiah's most successful attempts to deter the creature. One entry stands out, I read aloud. The beast retreated, and I thought I had succeeded, but moments later it returned with that terrible howl, greater than before. Clara nodded. He used lights and sound to drive it away. We can do the same, but with more intensity. We remembered how the creature had hesitated, even briefly, in the light when we first encountered it. So, we decided to rig bright floodlights all around the grounds, even setting up a motion detection system to warn us of anything approaching. The sound was a little more difficult. Ultimately, we agreed that the building's sound system could be used to project some sort of high-frequency sound that would be uncomfortable to most animals. We need to do some more research to see if we can find something that would be especially distressing to this creature. Clara mused. Tapping her chin, Jeremiah hadn't been as successful in his attempts to hunt the creature, according to one of his journal entries. I used a combination of bright lights and firecrackers, creating loud chaos and confusion. It actually fled into the woods, and for a moment I thought I had succeeded, but it returned later with an angry howl that chilled my very core. But we have the advantage of numbers, Clara said, her jaw set with determination, and we can be better prepared. We agreed to purchase a hunting rifle, even though none of us had ever used one before. Clara, ever practical, insisted on buying some traps as well, something we could use to try to slow the thing down if it got too close. Leo and Hannah, surprisingly, embraced their roles with a fierce protectiveness. They worked on reinforcing the house, making sure that all the doors and windows had strong, new locks, and even going so far as to board up the entrances to the basement and attic. I watched them with a mixture of fear and pride as they worked, transforming our peaceful retreat into a fortress a few days later. I was sitting in the living room on a blissfully uneventful evening, the quietest one we'd had in some time. Clara was in the kitchen preparing dinner, with Hannah assisting her by chopping vegetables, humming a quiet tune. Leo was upstairs in his room, immersed in a book, a rare moment of digital detox. I was fiddling with the new sound system we had set up in the room, testing the speakers. Without warning, the motion sensors tripped. In an instant, blinding spotlights erupted into our yard, illuminating the otherwise darkened evening with artificial daylight, stark and clinical. Another growl, louder and more menacing than before, sounded from outside, and this time the audio system automatically engaged, emitting a powerful ultrasonic pulse from every speaker along the outer walls of the house. "What the hell?" shouted Leo from the top of the stairs, but I couldn't hear anything else over the intense, high-pitched sound. Clara dropped the knife she was holding, her hand flying to her mouth as she fled into the living room, Hannah close behind her, her eyes wide with fear. There was an enraged howl from outside, followed by a massive impact against the house, shaking the very walls and rattling the frames and dishes in the cupboards. Clara reacted first, leaping to her feet and racing to the front door, throwing the deadbolt. "Hannah, help me with the windows," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. Hannah nodded, moving with surprising speed to begin locking and bracing every window in reach. Leo returned from the staircase, clutching a thick textbook. "What can I do, Dad?" he shouted over the deafening ultrasonic shriek. I pointed to the cupboard where the rifle was stored. "Grab the rifle." I started reaching for the back door, which we'd left open for airflow, a simple oversight in our otherwise meticulous preparations. Another crash against the side of the house, and I could see its dark silhouette outside the window. It was huge, its glowing eyes now lit up by the floodlights, and I could hear the wood splintering under its claws as it raked at the side of the house, leaving deep furrows in the logs. Leo came running back out with the rifle, its cold steel a shocking weight in my hands as I grabbed it from him. "Stay in here," I yelled, moving over to the front window. The thing's dark bulk slammed into the house again, and I could see it clearly now in the floodlights. It had to be 7 feet tall, standing up on its hind legs like that. Its body was heavily muscled, and I could see the sinews bunching and flexing under the thick, matted dark hair that covered it. The claws that were scratching and gripping at the wood were long and curved like sickles, glinting in the artificial light. But the worst were the eyes. They glowed eerily, a deep amber color, and they almost seemed to emanate their own light, burning with a malevolent intelligence, a cunning intent that chilled me to the bone. The head was massive, with tall, pointed ears that twitched at every sound. The muzzle was long and canine, broader than that of any wolf, and I could see the gleam of vicious fangs in its open maw even from here. Now that I was able to lay eyes upon it fully, I understood the reality of what we were facing. This wasn't just a creature. It was a predator. It didn't stop its assault, however. It slammed its bulk against the front of our home again, raking its claws across the timber with a grinding scrape, snarling with a vibration I could feel in my chest. Clara adjusted the volume on the sound system, cranking it even louder. The shriek increased, a truly agonizing sound, and the beast flinched, snarling in anger and pain, but still it didn't flee. Leo and Hannah were beside me at the window, Hannah flinching at every blow, her hands squeezing Leo's tightly. Leo just stood there, his jaw grimly set, watching the thing. "This isn't enough," Leo said quietly, his voice tight. I knew he was right. The thing was relentless, enraged. Then I remembered something else from Jeremiah's journal. "Clara, the firecrackers, we need to confuse it." Clara nodded, her eyes wide, and ran to the supply room where we had stored the firecrackers, Leo close on her heels. I kept my eyes on the thing at the window, rifle raised, prepared to fire if it breached the glass. A moment later, they returned, Leo holding a brick of firecrackers in one hand and a lighter in the other. He set the bundle on the floor and began tearing them off in handfuls. Moving to the front door, he pulled it open just a few inches and lit the first bunch, tossing them out into the grass in front of the porch with a rapid succession of deafening blasts and blinding flashes. The firecrackers went off, and I saw the creature stagger backwards, surprised, another howl emanating from its gaping maw. With the beast confused and staggering, I took the opportunity, lining up a shot at the bulk of its body. The muzzle flash was blinding in the dark, and the sound was deafening in the small area. The string of howls from the creature was abruptly interrupted by a sharp yelp of pain as my bullet struck home. Suddenly, the blazing eyes lost some of their eagerness and determination, and with a final, hate-filled glare in our direction, it retreated back into the darkness from which it came. Once again, the jungle was silent, save for the fading sizzle of the expended firecrackers and the acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder. We succeeded in driving it away for now, but I knew it would return, likely tomorrow night, and possibly with others of its kind. I couldn't help but feel a chilling sense of hopelessness. It was a cool, gray morning as a light mist blanketed the floor of the forest. None of us had slept more than a couple of hours after what had happened overnight, but there was an anxious energy among us all. "We know it's injured," I said, pointing to the map of the forest we'd spread out on the dining table. "If we can find where it holed up, we may be able to surprise it." Clara looked at me grimly but nodded, a resolute glint in her eyes. Leo seemed enthusiastic, his earlier fear replaced by a fierce determination. Hannah, though still scared, was equally determined. We split up, leaving Clara and Hannah back at the house to prepare it as best they could, while Leo and I cautiously entered the forest, weapons at the ready, senses alert for any movement or sounds that didn't belong. It was mid-morning when we found the first sign of the creature. A relatively large area of underbrush that had been recently crushed and spotted with dark smears of blood. Leo nodded and pointed silently to a high tree branch that had been recently broken, its bark shredded. We continued cautiously along the trail, setting pieces of bait every few yards, hoping to lure it into a trap or at least slow it down. Even the birds seemed to have vacated the area, and the gentle breeze that occasionally rattled the colorful leaves overhead somehow felt ominous, as if the whole of nature was aware and fearful of the beast that hunted within it. By the time afternoon neared its end, we arrived at a particularly dense copse of underbrush and surveyed our surroundings. That's when we spotted it, the den. Built against the base of an immense, ancient tree, the tree was partially hollow at its base, and more branches and leaves had been piled upon it to form a crude sort of camouflage. The sheer size of it was shocking, a grim reminder of the thing's bulk. The entire area had that musky, animal smell, almost tangible in its thickness. It was a smell you could taste in the back of your throat, a primal, raw stench of predator and decay. The entrance was littered with bones, bleached white by the sun. I recognized some of them as rabbit and deer, but others I couldn't identify. Something had been using this place as a den for a very long time, and the careless abandon of the bones, gnawed of all their flesh and left to rot, set my pulse racing. I noticed more of those deep scratches in the tree's bark, and saw them on a few of the neighboring trees as well, some of which had clumps of dark fur caught in the rough surface of the bark. The underbrush around the entrance of the den was trampled and pushed aside, creating a narrow trail that led off into the deeper, darker parts of the forest, likely the path the thing had used to come and go from its lair. The whole thing was deeply disturbing, almost bizarre. Taking one final, long look around at the creature's lair, I motioned to Leo, and we began heading back towards the cabin. The sun had started to dip lower in the sky, and I noticed the shadows cast by the trees had grown longer, stretching like grasping fingers. I was anxious to be away from this place and back at the cabin, the sense of dread growing with every minute we spent in the beast's territory. The return trip felt longer to me. Leo was a few steps ahead of me, keeping his eyes moving around us, his rifle held ready. I found myself glancing back over my shoulder frequently, an uneasy feeling in my stomach, like the woods had suddenly become different. "It's quiet, Dad," Leo said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "Too quiet. Do you feel it?" I asked, subconsciously adjusting my grip on the rifle. "Like we're being watched," Leo nodded, his eyes constantly scanning the trail ahead. "Just stay sharp," I told him. "Let's move a little faster." The feeling grew stronger the farther we went. The trees felt like they were crowding in around us, the shadows cast by the sinking sun growing long and dark. No longer were there any of the normal forest sounds, no chirping birds or rustling squirrels. It was like everything had just gone completely silent, leaving only the crunching of our footfalls and the occasional distant hoot of an owl in its wake. We'd made it about halfway to the house when I heard a distant howl and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I didn't need to hear that up close to recognize it. Leo and I locked eyes for a brief moment. "That wasn't a wolf, was it?" he asked, his face looking flushed and nervous. "No," I said grimly. "Let's go." We were jogging by the time we saw the lights of the house ahead of us, and again the howl came, closer this time, chillingly so. When we reached the house, we both breathed a sigh of relief. but neither of us could shake the feeling of unseen eyes upon us. Leo and I walked through the doorway, and the smell of fresh coffee greeted us. Clara and Hannah were sitting at the kitchen table and immediately stood when they saw us, their expressions anxious but with a measure of profound relief at our return. Clara spoke first, her voice tight. What did you find?" I looked at Leo, then back to her. "Its lair," I said. "Its nest, or whatever you want to call it." I noticed Clara's grip on the coffee mug in her hand tighten, turning her knuckles white. Hannah looked like she'd forgotten to breathe. Silence followed for a few moments, aside from the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall. Then Hannah asked quietly, "How was it?" I sighed heavily. "Exactly like some fever dream wolf den, only larger and more brutal." I described the evidence we found to them, the scattered bones, the claw-marked trees, the continuation of the trail deeper into the woods. I noticed Clara's eyes drift closed briefly, a shiver running through her. "The creature is highly territorial and almost certainly solitary," Leo added, his voice still a little shaky. "It's obviously been there for quite some time." It was getting close to midnight, and I suggested that we should get some rest, that we were going to need our strength tomorrow. They all agreed, and I could see the worry in each of their eyes as they nodded their heads. Clara stood and offered a weary smile. "I'll go and get the guest room set up for you, Elias," she said. Since the attacks began, the four of us had taken to sleeping in shifts, with one always remaining awake to stand watch. Tonight, it was Clara's turn. Hannah gave me a perfunctory hug, not quite as enthusiastic as her normal self. "Good night, Dad," she said, and hugged Leo as well before heading down the hallway with her mother. Leo patted me on the shoulder. "Night, Dad," he said, turning to follow Hannah, leaving me alone with Clara for a moment. Clara met my eyes. "We'll figure this out, Elias," she said, taking my hand and giving it a squeeze. "I know," I answered, embracing her briefly before she stepped around me, leaving me alone in the darkening kitchen. With one more paranoid look around the room, I flicked the light switch beside me, casting half of the house into darkness before heading to the guest room, where the cool night air drifted in lazily through the open window. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of the forest around the house, before sleep finally took me, wishing there was some way I could just wake up from this nightmare. The next morning, Leo and I found ourselves at the edge of the property, the underbrush crunching under our feet in the dim morning light. "We'll place the snares here and the tripwires along that game trail," I said, gesturing to a vine-covered, narrow stretch of ground to our right. Leo nodded in agreement, and we both dropped to our knees and began setting the first snare. I passed a coil of rope to Leo, and together we threaded it through an iron ring and secured it to the base of the springy sapling we had anchored in its drawn position. The snare was now ready, lying innocuously among the vegetation. The two of us worked our way around the areas we wanted to cover with the tripwires and other traps, understanding that this was more than just setting traps for some random animal, but confronting a predator that had been hunting us for weeks. More than once, I caught myself looking over my shoulder at the sound of leaves stirring in the breeze or the distant crack of a branch. After 3 hours, we surveyed the area and were satisfied that we'd covered as much ground as possible with the materials we had available. Now all we could do was wait, and then, without warning, we both halted our movements. The air in the clearing seemed to still, the sounds of the forest around us seemingly muted. We almost sensed its presence before we saw it, that uncomfortable feeling of eyes upon you. Slowly, we turned to our left, looking upon the tree line at the edge of the clearing. "It's watching us," I felt a chill wash over me as my eyes met those of the creature. It stood at the distant edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a tangle of ferns and low-hanging foliage. I could see its fierce eyes glowing from within the shadowed underbrush, luminous and unblinking as they fixed upon us. "Leo," I said in a whisper, grabbing his arm with my hand. "I see it," he said, his voice trembling. The thing didn't move for a long moment, and then suddenly it burst into a surprisingly quick stride, moving its bulk through the undergrowth with deceptive speed. Adrenaline flooded my body. "Go, run," I yelled, shoving Leo ahead of me. I didn't need to tell him twice. We turned and raced for the house. We'd spent days getting ready for this moment, but now that it was here, the fear was every bit as real and primal as it was the first time I saw that thing. I could hear it crashing through the trees behind us, feel the ground shaking with its massive strides. We dove through the front door, slamming it closed just as the thing slammed into it, growling in anger and frustration. Clara, Hannah, "Get upstairs now," I yelled. Clara was already at the bottom of the steps, pale and wide-eyed with fright, urging a similarly frightened Hannah back up the staircase. I heard the attic door close solidly above us. They'd be safe there for now. Leo and I made our way into the living room, hearts pounding in our chests. The rifle was still lying on the coffee table, and I grabbed it, feeling its cold, solid weight in my hands. Leo moved to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains, watching for the thing. "It's moving around the perimeter," he said nervously. I nodded. "Okay, you know it doesn't like loud noises, though. We'll drive it away again." Without warning, the thing outside lunged up at the window with its baleful, glowing eyes, and Leo leapt backwards as I squeezed the trigger of the rifle. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, and the roar of the muzzle blast filled the room. I saw the thing stagger back from the window, briefly illuminated by the muzzle flash, and it howled in fury and pain. But now it knew we were here, and it didn't slink away defeated. It continued its frenzied circling of the house, emboldened and enraged now. "We have to keep it out. We can't let it inside," I said, slamming another cartridge into the breech. Leo nodded in understanding, hefting a piece of firewood with nails driven through one end like a crude club. The thing moved with incredible speed, crashing its bulk against the door with bone-rattling force. I fired again, this time into its flank as it shifted, preparing to lunge at the door once more. The muzzle flash was accompanied by a howl of pain and rage from the beast as it staggered under the floodlight, now bleeding from multiple wounds, but still not relenting. "Dad!" Leo shouted from his position beside the window, where he was gripping the wooden club with white knuckles. "It's moving to the back of the house," he cried, panic rising in his voice. My heart was thundering in my chest as I raced to the rear door and reached it just as the thing leapt at the window. I fired again, and more glass exploded outward as the thing shrieked in pain and fury, staggering away from the back of the house before gathering itself again and resuming its attack, even more enraged now. "Dad!" Leo cried, jabbing the end of his club through the broken front window. I turned and raced back to him, working the bolt on the rifle as I went. The thing sprang up at the open window, and Leo slammed the club down on its snout with a sickening crunch, buying me a moment to take another shot. This one found its mark in the thing's shoulder, and it howled again in rage and agony. It continued its assault, but I could see that the wounds were affecting it already. It seemed to be slowing, and its movements were less frenzied. Without warning, it lunged up onto the porch with its snapping jaws and slashing claws. I fired again, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the unimaginable horror before me. With an enraged bellow that seemed to shake the very ground, the creature retreated once more into the darkness. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the chaos that preceded it. Leo and I exchanged a weary, adrenaline-fueled glance, and it slowly dawned on us that it was over. We'd survived. My hands still gripped the rifle tightly as I looked over at the shattered window, the splintered, claw-marked door that had kept them at bay just long enough. There was going to be a lot of work to do in the morning, but for now, it seemed the silence had returned to our home. Clara and Hannah cautiously descended the staircase, still wide-eyed with fear but otherwise unhurt. We shared some brief, reassuring words with each other, and as the adrenaline slowly faded, we all began to feel the first edge of exhaustion take hold. There'll be plenty of time to start repairs in the morning. For now, we've certainly earned our rest. Is it over?" Hannah asked shakily. Clara put a comforting arm around her and pulled her close. "Yes, it's over," she said, looking at me. Leo set the club down and straightened from behind the couch. "I'm going to walk the perimeter and make sure," he said. I nodded at him as Leo made his way around the room. I moved to the broken window and felt the chill night air upon my face, smelling of the forest that surrounded us. An unsteady tranquility seemed to have settled around us now, and I noted that Clara and Hannah had begun moving about, straightening and cleaning the debris from the living room. We'd wait until dawn before retreating to our rooms and trying to relax enough to sleep. But I suspected it would be some time before the fear that had gripped us fully faded, and the confidence that it was truly over returned. Already, however, I noted that the familiar howling that typically accompanied the night was blessedly absent, replaced only by the peaceful hum of forest life. The next morning, the air in the cabin still felt heavy with the lingering scent of gunpowder and the raw, splintered wood where the creature had attacked. We ate breakfast in a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere, the morning sun streaming through the repaired windows. Despite the exhaustion, there was a palpable sense of relief, a fragile hope that the worst was behind us. "We need to finish organizing the attic," Clara said after clearing the table. "Distraction is probably the best medicine right now." It was a reasonable suggestion, a return to normalcy. Besides, the last time we were up there, we'd only found Jeremiah's diary. Perhaps there was something else, some other clue we'd missed in our haste. The thought gnawed at me. We ascended the narrow attic stairs once more, the dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering through the small window near the apex of the roof. The air was thick and stale, a stark contrast to the fresh forest scent outside. Clara and Hannah set about clearing more of the antique furniture, while Leo and I returned to the corner where Jeremiah's journal had been found. We moved slowly, methodically, sifting through moldering boxes and forgotten trunks. My fingers brushed against something hard beneath a stack of brittle newspapers. I pulled it out. Another leather-bound book, this one thicker, older, and bound with a tarnished brass clasp. It wasn't a diary. It looked more like a scientific logbook, its cover emblazoned with a faded, almost illegible symbol. I carefully unlatched the clasp. The pages inside were filled with dense, precise handwriting, diagrams, and what looked like complex equations. "Another one," I mumbled, handing it to Leo. His eyes widened as he flipped through it. "This isn't a diary, Dad. This looks like research notes and a journal." He cleared his throat, a nervous energy building in the small space. "The first few pages are a little technical. Lots of jargon about subetheric resonance and dimensional harmonics, but then it shifts." He began to read, his voice gaining a strange gravitas as he deciphered the cramped script. Entry, August 14, 1962. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. My assignment to the Project Eldridge has commenced. Today I boarded the USS Eldridge, a vessel of unprecedented capabilities, alongside a contingent of observers. These observers are individuals of unique persuasion, adherents to an ancient doctrine. They wear crimson masks and flowing robes, their movements unnervingly fluid. Captain Hollister, a man whose usual steely composure wavered perceptibly in their presence, conducted a briefing regarding the mission's paramount secrecy. He issued each crew member a cyanide pill, a stark reminder of the extreme precautions required. The instruction was unambiguous. In the event of capture, or if the mission is compromised, you are to take the pill immediately. No exceptions. The air on deck was thick with a tension I found almost intoxicating, a prelude to something monumental. My scientific curiosity warred with a growing sense of dread. What had we truly set in motion? Leo paused, looking up, his face pale. Project Eldridge, this sounds military. Hannah and Clara had stopped moving furniture, their attention now entirely fixed on Leo. He continued, his voice a little shaky. Entry, August 17, 1962, 3 days at sea. The Eldridge, a marvel of human engineering, is undergoing its initial trials. The observers, or as they prefer to be called, the custodians of Eden, have begun their preparatory rituals below deck. Their chants, though muffled by the ship's hull, possess an unsettling resonance, a vibration that seems to bypass the ear and settle directly in the bone. There was an incident today. A young sailor, Briggs, took his cyanide pill, a tragic, if predictable, consequence of the immense psychological pressure. His death has cast a pall over the crew, transforming their excitement into a brooding resentment. Captain Hollister remained impassive, his resolve unyielding. "The mission is paramount," he declared. I watched the custodians. Their masks offered no expression, but I felt a current of satisfaction almost from them. They believe this sacrifice is a necessary component. I find their zeal disturbing, yet their knowledge of the esoteric, their understanding of the fabric of existence, is undeniable. They speak of Eden not as a lost paradise, but as a living, vast entity, the primordial source of all life in this universe, currently in a state of dormancy. Our mission, they claim, is to awaken it. A cold dread began to seep into the attic. "Eden," Clara whispered. Leo flipped a few more pages, his eyes scanning quickly. "Yes, it talks about Eden a lot. Here, entry, August 20th, 1962. The sky, it is gone. The sun, the moon, the stars vanished, replaced by an impenetrable void. The ship's engines are muffled, the sea unnaturally still. This is not a power outage, nor a natural phenomenon. The custodians are active. Their devices, an arcane fusion of ancient sigils and advanced technology, hum with an unnatural energy. They are manipulating the veil. I overheard fragments of their archaic language, words that resonated with a terrible power. They are calling to Eden, attempting to tear through the dimensions and bring the entity into our reality. The crew is in a state of near mutiny. Mayers, a burly sailor, confronted one of the custodians. Their response was silence, unnerving in its complete lack of reaction. The pressure is immense. Yandel, a nervous, quiet man, has become increasingly agitated, convinced we have sailed into an alien trap. I believe he is closer to the truth than he realizes. The custodians believe humanity's rapid evolution and its inherent darker impulses. Greed, hatred, war have begun to corrupt Eden, tainting the very source of life it represents. They believe the only way to save Eden, and by extension all universal life, is to purge the source of the corruption, humanity itself. Our mission is not to awaken Eden for humanity's benefit, but for its judgment. The logbook slipped from Leo's trembling fingers and fell to the dusty floor. The air in the attic seemed to thicken, pressing in on us. The silence, previously broken only by Leo's voice, was now absolute chilling. The friendly morning light filtering through the window seemed to dim, casting long, unsettling shadows. They think humanity is a disease, Hannah whispered, her eyes wide with a horror far deeper than the fear of a monster in the woods. And they want to unleash Eden to wipe us out. Clara's face was ashen. My mind reeled. Jeremiah's diary, the beast in the forest, it all clicked into place, but in a way that was infinitely more terrifying. The howls, the claw marks, the beast's unusual intelligence, it wasn't just an animal, it was a guardian. A harbinger, a warden. This cabin, this forest, this was a place of power, a nexus point. And we had stumbled right into the middle of it. Leo picked up the journal, his hands steadying with a new kind of resolve. He kept reading, his voice barely above a whisper, recounting Dr. Thorne's increasingly frantic entries. Entry, August 25, 1962, a week of unbroken darkness. The psychological toll is devastating. Crew members are succumbing to madness, paranoia rampant. Mayers, in a fit of delusion, attacked Yandel, accusing him of conspiring with the custodians. Yandel, in a moment of sheer terror, consumed his cyanide pill. Another life lost to this infernal mission. I witnessed a custodian manipulating its own flesh, peeling back layers of skin to reveal writhing, pulsing organs. It was not a human form beneath those robes. It was liquid shifting, an impossible arrangement of biological matter. When it sensed my presence, its head swiveled, revealing not a face, but a mass of undulating tentacles surrounding a single, unblinking eye. My mind recoils from the memory. What are these entities we've brought aboard? And what is Eden if its custodians are such aberrations? The descriptions were too vivid, too precise to be mere ramblings of a madman. Leo continued, his voice strained. Entry, August 27, 1962. The Eldridge is breaking apart. Massive waves, impossible in their scale, are pummeling the ship. The sky is no longer just black, but blazes with an otherworldly light, sickly greens, pulsing purples. And through the maelstrom I see them. Vast, tentacled monstrosities writhing across the heavens, forms that defy geometry, forms that hurt the eye to behold. Eyes larger than moons blink lazily, focusing on our tiny vessel with malevolent interest. Captain Hollister, broken by the impossible horror, committed suicide on the bridge. I was there. I saw it. Then a colossal eye, the size of our entire ship, peered through the shattered window of the bridge, tendrils thick as redwoods snaking around, their suckers latching onto the metal with sickening pops. The entity, Eden, its presence filled the flooded bridge, an oppressive weight bearing down on my mind. It probed me, Elias. It burrowed into my thoughts, sifting through my memories with cold, clinical precision. I saw civilizations rise and fall in the blink of an eye, entire galaxies swallowed by hungry voids. My sanity frayed, teetering on the brink of absolute madness. In desperation, I clung to one thing, my family. The memory of my wife, my daughter, a bulwark against the cosmic horror. It faltered, as if encountering something it couldn't understand. I flooded my mind with love, with warmth, with every cherished recollection. The pain in my head receded. The alien presence withdrew. The tendrils loosened. It retreated. I escaped. But it wasn't over. It only withdrew. And I stole what I could, these logs, these notes, so that others might know. So they might be warned. Eden is waking. And the creatures, the guardians, they are merely clearing the path. Leo finished, the book falling closed with a soft thud. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, but a void, a chilling vacuum that sucked the air from our lungs. The monster in the forest, the one we had just fought, the one Jeremiah Thorne had chronicled, it was a guardian. a sentinel, and the howls, the claw marks, they weren't just territorial warnings, they were signals, a prelude to the true awakening. The world outside, the one we had fled to for peace, was not just a wilderness, but a fragile skin over an ancient, slumbering horror, now stirring. The howls returned that night, but they were different. No longer just animalistic cries of rage or pain. They resonated with a deep, undulating bass, a sound that seemed to vibrate in our very bones, bypassing the ears entirely. It was a symphony of cosmic sorrow and awakening, a sound that burrowed directly into our minds, stirring up forgotten fears, whispering fragmented, alien thoughts into the edges of our consciousness. The air itself began to change, growing heavy, almost viscous. The cabin, our fortress, now felt like a fragile bubble, barely holding back an unseen, encroaching tide. We didn't know what to do. Jeremiah's diary had warned us of the creature, and we'd fought it. Dr. Thorne's journal, however, revealed that the creature was merely a symptom, a consequence. The true horror was a cosmic entity, Eden stirring from its ancient slumber, its awakening driven, paradoxically, by humanity's own destructive essence. If it fully awoke, if it fully manifested, the implications were too vast, too terrifying to comprehend. The creature returned. It didn't slam against the house this time. It stood silently at the edge of the tree line, its glowing eyes fixed on us through the windows. Its howls were now accompanied by a low, guttural chanting, not from its own maw, but seemingly from the very air around it. The sound was not angry, but inviting, coaxing, and the howls were answered. Distant, deeper roars echoed from the unseen depths of the forest, sounds of immense weight and chilling power. Our forest warden, the beast we'd injured, was not attacking us but calling its kin, or perhaps calling to something far greater. Then the sky began to change. Not slowly, but abruptly. The moon, a bright disk just moments before, dissolved into nothingness. The stars winked out, swallowed by an inky, absolute blackness that pressed down on the cabin, a tangible weight. It was the darkness Dr. Thorne had described, a void that devoured all light. And within that void, faint, sickly green and pulsing purple flashes began to tear through the gloom, illuminating the churning canopy of the forest in grotesque, fleeting tableaus. And for a terrifying moment I saw them. Not the creature, but the forms Dr. Thorne had described. Vast, impossible shapes, twisting and undulating in the heavens, tentacled monstrosities writhing across the now invisible sky. Eyes larger than our cabin blinked lazily from the void, fixing upon our tiny home with an ancient, malevolent interest. My sanity began to fray. I could feel it, a delicate thread unraveling. Clara clutched my arm, her face a mask of primal terror. Hannah was openly sobbing, buried in Leo's chest, who himself looked pale, his eyes wide with a comprehension far beyond his years. The cabin was no longer a sanctuary. It was a focal point, a nexus. The world was being peeled back, and what lay beneath was pure, unadulterated cosmic horror. A deafening crack split the air, not from the creature, but from the very ground. The cabin lurched violently, sending us stumbling. Water, black and oily, began to seep through the floorboards, not from rain, but from somewhere beneath. The air grew thick, an unbearable pressure building in my head. The monster we had fought, the one in the forest, lunged at the window, not in a frenzied attack, but as if in a desperate escape. It clawed at the glass, whimpering, a sound that was surprisingly small, terrified. It was not the hunter anymore. It was fleeing from the true awakening. And then, through the shattered window, amidst the rising water and the impossible shapes in the sky, I saw it. A ripple in the very fabric of reality, a shimmering distortion in the center of our living room. It expanded, growing, sucking the light, the sound, the very air from the room. It was not a physical entity, not in the way we understood. It was a presence vast and ancient, a consciousness that dwarfed everything. It was Eden. It was here. I felt its probe, a cold, alien presence invading my mind, sifting through my memories, just as Dr. Thorne had described. It was a violation, a metaphysical rape of my very being. Images flashed, my childhood home, my wedding day, the faces of my family. Each memory tinged with an otherworldly filter, twisted, distorted. "Get out of my head," I screamed, my voice raw, but it was just a whisper against the roaring tide of alien thought. The presence burrowed deeper, the pain in my skull intensifying, threatening to split it open. I saw things that defied description, eons of existence, worlds born and devoured, the cosmic ballet of creation and destruction unfolding in an instant. I was nothing, humanity was nothing, a fleeting flicker in a grand, terrifying design. But then I remembered Dr. Thorne's final entry. The bulwark, my family. I latched onto them, their faces, their laughter, their love. I forced myself to focus, pouring every ounce of my will, every cherished memory, every scrap of love and warmth I possessed into that mental image. Clara's smile, Hannah's innocent giggles, Leo's quiet strength. I clung to them, a defiant beacon in the encroaching darkness of the cosmic mind. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you both so much." The probing faltered. The pain receded. The alien presence withdrew, a confusion, a hesitation, a subtle anomaly in its vast, indifferent mind. The shimmering distortion in the center of the room began to shrink, to recede, as if pulled back by an unseen force. The impossible shapes in the sky began to fade, the colors bleeding into the oppressive blackness. Then slowly, agonizingly, the stars began to return, one by one, like timid pinpricks of light. The unearthly pressure in my head lessened. The creature, the forest beast, was gone, vanished back into the woods, or wherever it found refuge from the entity it guarded. We were left in the ruins of our living room, gasping, shaking, drenched in the foul-smelling water that now covered the floor. The cabin was shattered, splintered, its walls groaning, but it was still standing. The sky was still dark, but the stars were there, cold and indifferent. The forest was silent once more, not the terrifying silence of an awakening, but the familiar, peaceful quiet of the woods at night. We had survived. We had looked into the abyss, and for a fleeting moment, the abyss had looked back and then, inexplicably, had recoiled. But it wasn't over. It was never truly over. We had merely caught a glimpse, a fragment of a truth too vast for human minds to fully grasp. The monster in the forest had been a terrifying guardian, a warning system. But the real horror wasn't something that could be shot or trapped or driven away with lights and noise. The real horror was ancient, cosmic, and it was still out there. It had only withdrawn. It had only paused. We had survived the night, yes, but our minds, our sanity, that was the true prey, and it had only just begun its hunt. What part of this chilling tale stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts below, and follow for more stories that twist the knife of reality.